Hey there, nature lovers. Welcome to another episode of Notes from the Field. And I'm pretty sure you can tell that James Steady Hands Holder is not with me today. He's on another assignment. And so I'm out here alone in the Prescott National Forest, which of course is in the Mogollon Highlands. And we're out here on a beautiful end of February day. It's probably about 60 degrees, maybe even 65. Very nice. And we're in that Chaparral biotic community. So just so you know, Chaparral comes from a Spanish word, Chaparral, which means oak. And lo and behold, there's a heck of a lot of oak out here. Now I know folks who are on the eastern seaboard or maybe west coast are looking at these plants as I walk by them thinking, yeah, Bob, those aren't oaks, brother. I can show you oaks if you just come on out to New England. Well, whether you like it or not, these are oaks, and mostly of one species, Quercus turbinella. And the species epithet, turbinella, comes from the naming of the acorns that these plants produce. They're kind of like little turbans. Now, what brings us out here today is an opportunity once again for me to introduce to you a big idea. And then you take that big idea and maybe, or maybe not, apply that big idea to your natural history practice. And the big idea that I want to introduce you to today is the idea of carbon allocation. And the big picture story here is, once again, the story of evolution, that beautiful, powerful story of selective pressures. And the Chaparral biotic community could be characterized as a special lab for evolution of plants. And we're going to be looking at the allocation of carbon in chaparral species. Now, this idea does not only apply to the chaparral, of course. Wherever you're located, the plants around you face a dilemma. What shall I do with the coin of the realm once I capture it? And you might be wondering, what is the coin of the realm? Well, the coin of the realm is carbon. Carbon is not only the molecule that carries energy, but it is also a molecule that is used in the tissues and the nutrient transport systems of plants. And so all plants have evolved with this pressure of, what am I going to do with that carbon once I get it? Should I invest it in roots? Should I invest it in trunks, stems, leaves? How about the size of those leaves? Well, that's all part and parcel of the story out here. And the story is particularly compelling out here in the Chaparral simply because there's an enormous pinch point in the evolution of these plants annually. What is that pinch point? Well, it's called June. In the Mogollon Highlands, we get 2 periods of precipitation, one in the winter and one in the summer. And the one in the summer is preceded by a series of enormously hot days and absolutely arid days. All right, it's time to get up close and personal with the chaparral. Here we go. Here's a little break. We can get in, poke around out here and find the perfect Quercus turbinella shrub live oak to talk about. Whoa, all caught up there. You grabby. And we can think a little bit about this notion of carbon allocation and natural selection. Ooh, look at that big one right there, that shrub live oak. Look how big that thing is. Look how much ground it covers. You'll notice a number of other species out here, and for the most part, save these pinyon pines, which are part of a different biotic community. You know, nature never likes to keep things nice and neat. These interlopers are from the Great Basin conifer woodland, sometimes known as the pinyon juniper woodland. Uh-oh, this is gonna hurt. Ow, ooh. They're not thorny, but they're tough. Oh, here's, ain't going that way. Maybe there's a breakthrough here. So, I used to tell my students that when we, ooh, that's nasty looking. Here we go. Behave. Ow. Good. They would get angry with me when we'd come into the chaparral, even though I'd warn them that they needed to wear, let go of me, pants and long sleeves. Ooh, look at that. Right silk tassel. They would get angry with me for walking off trail because they get all scratched up. I get all scratched up. And I would explain to them, well, think of it this way. Think of this as inoculation. That you're getting, oh, dang it. Quit already, you little bugger. Okay, sorry, pardon me. Excuse me. Here we go. That you are getting inoculated against the ills of modern society. Just think of every little scratch you're getting out here as a small vaccination. And this small vaccination is going to inoculate you with a little bit of the chaparral wildness. Oh yeah, here we go. Break on through to the other side. Look at this. Look at that hillside. Goodness me. All that chaparral. And if you look closely, every one of these plants look almost exactly the same. For example, this plant looks to the leaf almost exactly like this plant. Way different species, way different families, and different evolutionary past. So when I said that this is the great evolutionary proving ground, or evolutionary laboratory, is because that selective pressure, when it is so extreme, as in the month of June here, there are going to be certain features and characteristics of plants that are going to be very, very similar. However, beneath that facade are some fascinating stories, and not the least of which, the story of carbon allocation, and maybe different life strategies that have been selected for among the shrubland. So right about now, you're probably thinking, Bob, tell me more about this carbon allocation thing? Well, like I said at the very beginning of the video, carbon is the coin of the realm. And that just simply is because carbon is a pathway that energy is carried through, as well as the building units for all life. And so plants out here are trying to capture carbon. So once a plant captures carbon, it needs to store that carbon somewhere or use it as an energy source. And that's one thing that a lot of folks don't realize, is that plants are respiring all the time. Even whenever they're dormant, they need to use energy to keep their physiological processes and those mechanisms of life. They need to feed them. They need to keep them alive. So that energy or that carbon is used either for respiration, energy of life, or it is stored. Or another thing that might become of it is invested someplace. It is allocated to the structure of the plant. Now out here, whenever you look around, you see some shrub-like growth. Well, what has been selected for out here is carbon allocation to the roots. And if we were to turn this landscape patos arriba, upside down, there would be a pretty big forest of roots, probably bigger than the plants themselves. So what's selected for here is carbon allocation to the roots. And whenever carbon is allocated to the leaves, that carbon is allocated to the leaves in a way that invests in the future, because they're evergreen. So they're not deciduous. They don't hang on to their leaves for a season. Some of these plants keep their leaves for 2 years. So it makes a lot of sense. If you're going to invest in a structure, it probably makes the most sense that you hang on to that structure, that it's operational throughout the year. And that's one way these organisms claim space. You have to remember that photosynthesis operates optimally roughly between 50 degrees Fahrenheit and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it can operate below 50 degrees, but it's just not very efficient. Can operate above 70 degrees, just not as efficient. And so plants that are evergreen, that means that that day in late February, like right now, there's an opportunity to capture some carbon, some photosynthate. And then that plant is going to invest it in the roots out here, rather than branches, stems, and trunks. Why? Well, rain comes in 2 seasons once again. In the winter, it comes in the form of snow, typically, sometimes rain, and that's at temperatures where the plants aren't very active. And so it's difficult for the plant to translate that water into growth, because photosynthesis is pretty inefficient. In the summer, however, there is a moment of precipitation, and that's the monsoons. That's whenever low pressure systems kick moisture up from the south, subtropical moisture, and form these enormous thunderstorms. And enormous thunderstorms are scattered. Unlike winter rain, which is pretty evenly spread, or winter precipitation, in the summer, it's scattered. It's kind of random, kind of chaotic. It is not predictable, and some plants will go for the whole season without a thunderstorm. When it comes hot and heavy. And so investing in a root system that allows you to capture that moisture during your growing season, your photosynthetically active period, that is selected for. There's a big advantage in that. Now, the other thing to know is that beneath us, the rhizosphere is a whole world where there's all kinds of things operating. And there's the realm of investment in community. And so it looks a lot like competition out here, you know, each plant for itself. But interestingly enough, these plants below ground can be connected to one another through fungal mats or through fungi. And also, each one of these plants is probably investing a certain amount of its photosynthate into an exudate. An exudate means simply materials that are secreted. And so these plants will secrete nutrients that they've captured and earned the hard way to the ground below. Why? Well, evolution selects for these kind of ingenious little situations, and what's going on beneath the surface of the earth are some really interesting, most of them mutualistic relationships with fungi and bacteria. And so the plants, will invest as much as 10% of that precious photosynthate, that precious carbon, into structures and relationships that ensure they are going to get nutrients for the most part. People ask me, hey Bob, how do you know those plants in the chaparral, like those shrub live oak, have enormous roots? Well, I'm standing in a railroad grade, and this railroad grade is abandoned, and it was served the former railroad that went from Prescott down to Phoenix. And this railroad grade was probably cut in the latter part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century. And so it exposed the roots of some of these Quercus turbinellas. Here, let's check this out. Look at that. I know, the gasp was audible. Y'all saw that and went, whoa, dang, look at that. Bob ain't lying. Look, the above ground part of this plant is fairly insubstantial, although I can tell by this screen that you really can't see it, but it is the normal kind of Quercus turbinella. But check the roots out on this baby. And that's just part of the show. The other thing to know is these plants can be as old as 500 years. I ain't joking. I read that in the literature once. That fires burned through Chaparral 75, 100 years, maybe even more quickly than that, depending on the particular location. And so they burned off from the top down. What has been selected for here is solid carbon allocation in the form of roots and non-solid carbon allocation in the form of, well, just think of it as sap in the roots. So whenever a fire comes through, the plant immediately regenerates. And so there's no growth rings on this plant, so there's no real way of knowing. Some carbon-14 dating is what I read about. So this idea of carbon allocation is really, really important for plants in the chaparral, because this provides them the wherewithal to rejuvenate after a fire. What does this have to do with my natural history practice? It's another big idea. You can disregard it, discard it, or you can think about this idea of the coin of the realm, those carbon atoms, and what a plant is going to do with those carbon atoms based on the selective pressures that it faces. If we were streamside, we could look at that carbon allocation, turn one of those plants over down there in the stream side, and we'd realize, oh wow, they're not investing a whole lot of their carbon, coin of the realm, in their roots. It's all in trunk, branches, stems, and leaves. I invite you, next time you go into that place you're curious about, know, love intimately, try that screen on. Try that filter on, and look at the landscape with that big idea in place. I sure appreciate you watching these notes from the field. And you know, we have so many resources on our website. I just invite you to go over to naturalhistoryinstitute.org and check them out. Doesn't cost you a thing. Same way with our YouTube channel. There are a lot of great videos in there. Check out our speaker series. There's some fascinating talks on there. And go ahead, hit that subscribe button. And who knows, maybe you have an idea for one of these notes from the field. Go ahead, enter it in the comments section. I'm interested in trying most anything out here.